On this Tuesday night, America's escalating coronavirus crisis. Overwhelmed hospitals, rising infections, and rising deaths.
And people will needlessly die.
Plus, how much longer the Canada-U.S. border could stay closed to non-essential travel. A Quebec father still on the run, the obstacles making this manhunt even tougher. Saving Atlantic right whales, Canada's efforts to preserve and protect this endangered species. And he spent months in intensive care.
It is a miracle that he survived it.
One man's cautionary tale about COVID-19.
It's my second chance.
Global National with Dawna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We begin tonight with the quest for a coronavirus vaccine. Human clinical trials are now underway here in Canada of a vaccine candidate developed by a Canadian company, part of the race for a vaccine that's taking place in labs around the world. Quebec biopharmaceutical company Medicago began the first of 3 phases of clinical trials yesterday. The company says 180 healthy volunteers between the ages of 18 and 55 are taking part. It hopes to move to phase 2 and 3 by October. That will involve testing a wider field of volunteers. Today, Canada's Deputy Public Health Officer cautioned that early evidence suggests even those who have had COVID-19 may not be immune to it for long. You could get it again, the same way people keep catching colds. That's why a vaccine is vital.
Most scientists, being very optimistic, might think that if there were to be a vaccine, it really wouldn't be before 2021. What's I think also important is that we do these trials properly.
Never before has so much effort been concentrated on vaccine development. 23 potential candidates have now reached human clinical trials. 2 frontrunners have moved into phase 3 and widespread human testing. In May, the National Research Council of Canada said it was collaborating with the Chinese firm CanSino on another potential vaccine. Human trials in Canada of that are delayed, though they have begun on Chinese military personnel. In the absence of a vaccine, the only effective way to break the chain of transmission is by keeping people physically distant. The U.S. is a grim case study in what happens when you reopen the economy too soon. It now has nearly 3.4 million confirmed cases of COVID-19, and more than 136,000 people are known to have died from it. And today, at least 3 states, North Carolina, Alabama, and Florida, reported a record number of deaths in a single day. The worst may still be yet to come. The director of the Centers for Disease Control says he fears fall and winter will be, as he says, one of the most difficult times that Americans have experienced in public health. Jackson Proskow reports on the COVID-19 crisis still out of control.
On the front lines of the pandemic, doctors across the U.S. are seeing something tragically predictable: record numbers of hospitalizations and deaths.
If one place in the United States is unsafe, then we're all unsafe from COVID-19.
Dr. Vin Gupta is a lung specialist in Seattle. He says while COVID-19 treatments have improved, a wave of new fatalities is now unavoidable after the rapid rise in cases in so many states.
At some point, this increase in cases is going to result in an overwhelming amount of hospitalizations that will spill over into ICUs, and people will needlessly die. There's only so much the system can take. And we know that even if you're young, you can end up in the ICU.
At the same time, testing shortages have come roaring back. The system is so overwhelmed with demand, it's taking more than a week for many Americans to get their results.
If testing delays are running a week plus, you're going to miss the window for possibly as many as two more generations of transmission before you get even the test results on that first generation.
That means the virus is spreading undetected. In New York, there are fears of a resurgence in cases. The governor has expanded a mandatory quarantine order to cover anyone coming from 22 different states.
We can't be in a situation where we have people coming from other states in the country bringing the virus.
More and more states are eyeing a fresh shutdown as the only way to get the pandemic under control. They may reluctantly end indoor dining and close bars and gyms all over again. But even if they do it tomorrow, it will be too late to stop this surge. And tonight there are concerns about how that surge will be documented and monitored. The Trump administration is now ordering hospitals to bypass the Centers for Disease Control and send key information about hospital bed use and ventilator usage directly to a national database being kept in Washington. Dawna, that is raising serious concerns about the data being politicized or even manipulated to downplay the severity of the crisis.
Jackson Proskow in Washington, thanks. There are reports the U.S. and Canada have agreed to keep the border closed for at least another month. The border will stay shut to non-essential travel until at least August 21st. The border has been closed since March 21st, and its reopening has now been pushed back 4 times. Only essential workers, trade shipments, and those reuniting with immediate family members are allowed to cross. Recent polling suggests more than 80% of Canadians favor keeping the border restrictions in place, and Canada's public health officers agree.
Canadians have made tremendous sacrifices to date in terms of flattening the curve, and we're seeing the fruits of our labors, to be quite honest. And I think we're very mindful that we don't want to, quote, waste those efforts by potentially, quote, reintroducing the virus into Canada and increasing the risk of further transmissions.
A couple from Florida has been charged after failing to self-isolate for 14 days after arriving in northern Ontario from the United States. Police say the couple arrived through the Fort Erie border crossing on July 3rd, en route to a seasonal property. After failing a compliance check, they were charged under the Quarantine Act, and both were fined $1,000. They're now being closely monitored by the local health unit. On the weekend, Florida shattered the U.S. record for the largest single-day increase in new cases of COVID-19 in any American state. In other news, the intense manhunt for a Quebec father of 2 young girls who were found dead is now in its 6th day. Police have expanded the search for Martin Carpentier, who was last seen on Wednesday with his 2 daughters when they were still alive. The focus of the search is dense forested terrain near Quebec City. As Mike Armstrong reports, people who live nearby are on edge.
It is a massive effort. Searchers on the ground checking every inch of ditches, while in the air the land is being scanned by thermal cameras. Police had cordoned off and focused the search on one specific area, about 15 square kilometers. They've now expanded that to about 50 square kilometers. Watching it all, people in the area getting more and more nervous.
C'est quelque chose qui nous inquiète.
This woman says it's scary that her family doesn't go out like they normally would. 44-year-old Martin Carpentier has now been missing for 6 days. He abducted his daughters last Wednesday. Nora and Romy were found dead in the forest 3 days later.
Je suis venue me recueillir pour
The girl's mother spoke out Monday, calling them her princesses of love. Amélie Lemieux said her daughters were her reason for living. Now, that pain is shared by Nadine Briand. She's lived through it. In 2012, her ex killed her 2 children.
Je me suis replongée carrément.
Briand says she's been taken right back into the pain she lived and can't stop thinking about Lemieux's suffering. What may make it all worse is that Carpentier is still missing.
We don't know what he has.
Well, survival expert Sheldon Kong says it's possible Carpentier is moving constantly. That makes the search harder. He may also have gotten outside the perimeter where police are looking.
It's possible that he can travel farther than people may expect.
One thing Carpentier has going for him is stress. Kong says the psychological motivation of trying to evade police can help someone push their body harder than they'd normally be able to. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Montreal.
A day after Prime Minister Justin Trudeau apologized for another controversy that is all his own making, we're waiting to see what happens next. Trudeau's wife, mother, and brother have been paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to appear at We charity events. Trudeau now says he should have recused himself from discussions about whether to award the charity the deal to administer a $900 million federal student grant contract. The opposition Tories want the RCMP to investigate. The ethics commissioner is investigating. Trudeau has broken ethics rules twice before, and this case raises more questions about his judgment. Today, our Abigail Bimman spoke with the previous ethics commissioner. Abigail, what does she have to say?
Dawna, Mary Dawson wants to be careful not to step on the current ethics commissioner's toes, so she's not offering up predictions. But she does say while the Prime Minister's interview with the current commissioner is what matters most, his public apology this week makes a difference.
But it's the admission that he feels that he has not failed to recuse, which is a requirement of the Act. So he's effectively said, I've not followed the Act as far as I can see. So it seems to me that's one probably fairly certain finding of contravention.
Does that make the ethics commissioner's job easier if the subject comes right out and says, I apologize?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Dawson says she produced about 30 reports in her 10 years on the job. Her Trudeau investigation took about a year, and she says her findings there show the Act applies to the Prime Minister as equally as to anyone else. It was like any other case.
And I think one had to be very careful. It's people's reputations, and so one had to look into it carefully and make sure you had the proper facts. Maybe people don't understand. It's actually carried out much like a judicial process.
And a note on language. There were previously debates over how to phrase it when Trudeau was found to have broken the ethics rules twice before. Dawson says you never use the word guilty. That refers to criminal law. This is about contraventions under civil law. Dawna?
Abigail Bimman in Ottawa, thank you. Now to a Global News investigation about RCMP surveillance of some First Nations groups. 3 years ago, a watchdog report investigated complaints officers inappropriately spied on some Indigenous people opposed to a pipeline. Yet the RCMP has failed to provide a response. As Heather Yourex-West explains, the delay is raising serious questions about whether the RCMP watchdog can effectively hold Canada's National Police Force to account.
In 2010, a group of Northern BC First Nations began a campaign to stop the Northern Gateway pipeline from being built across their territory. They had no idea they were being watched by the RCMP until a 2011 intelligence report came to light. In it, the RCMP described a private meeting organized by the Indigenous leaders.
I was in shock. I didn't expect that of the RCMP.
In February 2014, the BC Civil-Liberties Association filed a complaint with the RCMP Civilian Review Commission.
The CRC, which acts as a watchdog to the RCMP, agreed to investigate. In June 2017, a report was submitted to the RCMP. But to date, there has been no response from the commissioner, and the report has not been made public. This copy, obtained through access to information legislation, is heavily redacted. But in a letter to the BC Civil Liberties Association, the Commission's acting director revealed the report contained 18 findings and 7 recommendations for the force.
We believe that it seems that the Civilian Review Commission may have found evidence that the RCMP was in fact engaged in those activities. And here we are 6 years later, and we can't even get confirmation about that.
This criminology professor says the delay speaks to a big problem with how the Civilian Review Commission is able to hold the RCMP to account.
It is a toothless bulldog whose role in reality is to give a veneer of legality to a fundamentally flawed process.
The RCMP says due to the volume and complexity of the relevant material, it's still difficult to predict how much longer it will take to respond to the watchdog's report, but it hopes to put forward a response by the fall of this year. After 3 years, Jackie Thomas believes enough time has already passed.
I would like to see it public. I would like to read it and review it for myself.
Heather Yourex-West, Global News, Calgary.
Charged with luring young girls. Coming up, the former girlfriend of Jeffrey Epstein enters a plea in her sex crimes case. In a New York courtroom, Ghislaine Maxwell pleaded not guilty today to charges she facilitated the sex abuse of underage girls by her late ex-boyfriend, Jeffrey Epstein. Maxwell appeared by a video link in Manhattan. She's accused of luring at least 3 girls in the 1990s, including one as young as 14, and grooming them to endure sexual abuse by Epstein. Maxwell was denied bail after 2 accusers begged the judge to keep her in detention. She'll stay behind bars until her trial next July. If convicted, Maxwell faces up to 35 years in jail. The UK has reversed its decision on Huawei, saying today the Chinese telecom giant will be banned from its 5G networks. By the end of this year, Britain's mobile networks must stop buying Huawei equipment, and within 7 years, they'll need to remove the company's existing components from their infrastructure. Britain's leading intelligence agency says it could no longer guarantee the supply of Huawei equipment after U.S. sanctions were imposed on the company. The move is expected to delay the rollout of the UK's 5G network by up to 3 years. Canada is now the last of the Five Eyes countries to make a decision on using Huawei's 5G technology. Today, the federal government said it's still considering advice from our security agencies and from our allies and partners. One step from extinction ahead, the new warning about right whales. The future of the North Atlantic right whale is deeply uncertain. Today, the International Union for Conservation of Nature classified this species as critically endangered. That's just one step away from becoming extinct. Right whales have been on the endangered list in Canada for some time, and as Jesse Thomas reports, it's hoped the international attention will make a difference before it's too late.
2019 was devastating for the North Atlantic right whale. 9 whales died, their giant gray carcasses found floating in the waters around the Gulf of St. Lawrence and the eastern waters off Nova Scotia.
We know why they die. For the most part, we know they get hit by vessels and they get caught in fishing gear. We know why they're injured. It's the same two things.
Tanya Wimmer collaborated on the 2019 Atlantic right whale incident report, 210 pages detailing the dire circumstances for a species on the brink of extinction. Experts believe the population hovers around 400, migrating along the east coast of North America from Florida to the Gulf of St. Lawrence. The majority of deaths over the past 4 years have been in Canadian waters. 12 whales died in and around the Gulf of St. Lawrence in 2017.
These are animals that used to number in the tens of thousands.
Last week, the International Union for Conservation of Nature classified the right whale as critically endangered, estimating fewer than 250 mature whales are alive today. Fisheries and Oceans Canada says no deaths or entanglements have been reported in Canadian waters so far this season, but off the coast of New Jersey last month, a young right whale died after being hit by a ship. Fisheries and Oceans Canada confirmed there have been fewer vessels like cruise ships in Canadian waters, but fishing activities in the Gulf of St. Lawrence have been on par with previous seasons. Identifying critical habitat with use of acoustic technology and aerial surveillance by plane, along with innovations and modification to fishing gear, have all been credited with keeping the population safer this season. In British Columbia, a study examining noise levels in the Strait of Georgia found noise levels in the water in April were 5 decibels quieter than the previous year. That's a 50% drop in noise pollution, says this oceanographer.
And we found in the inshore waters just outside the port of Vancouver that the mean weekly power had decreased by about half over that first quarter, so over those first 3 months. And offshore, out in the deep, deep ocean, it had reduced by about 15%.
And Wimmer hopes international acknowledgement of the right whale's endangered status helps coordinate protection efforts.
All of this international attention, all of these other international experts who might now sort of look at the issue and say, how can I help?
And help bring this endangered species back from the brink of extinction. Jesse Thomas, Global News, Halifax.
Next, the Toronto man who spent 9 weeks on a ventilator finally breathes fresh air. There is so much doctors still don't know about why COVID-19 hits some people so hard and why others have no symptoms. Every patient offers new insight. In Toronto, one 51-year-old man was so sick he spent 9 weeks on a ventilator. Doctors knew his odds were not good, and yet somehow he came through it. Karen Lieberman has his story.
Mario Castillo enjoys his first real breaths of fresh outdoor air in 4 months. The last time he saw the sun, it was March.
It's my first time I go outside to feel the air.
Something simple doctors never imagined would be possible for someone who fell so sick with COVID-19.
Maybe around 12 o'clock, I tell my boss, I'm not feeling good.
The 51-year-old mechanic spent the next week in bed before finally going to the ER.
The doctor coming and said to me, you have you have the COVID.
So he presented to the hospital about 5 to 10 days after symptoms started with shortness of breath.
Dr. Jamie Spiegelman treated Castillo in the ICU. Initially, he only required oxygen, but within hours, his respiratory status worsened. He became Humber River Hospital's first intubated COVID-positive patient.
When we put in the machine, is when everything gone.
The efforts of the medical team were relentless, but his condition continued to deteriorate.
We didn't think he was going to survive because he was on so much life support.
Doctors don't know why some patients die from the virus while others survive.
No one really understands the pathology behind it yet.
Castillo's wife also tested positive for the virus. From the family home in quarantine, she kept hoping he would pull through.
We just keep praying. I know Mario can make it. He's a fighter. He's a strong man.
For 3 excruciating months, she was not allowed to visit her husband.
What if something happened to him? I did not even say, I love you. I didn't even hug him.
Castillo's x-rays showed significant damage to the lungs, but within weeks his condition began to improve. After 70 days on a ventilator,
I open my eyes and I see everybody, the doctor around me.
For survivors of COVID-19, beating it may just be the beginning. The virus has taken a toll on Castillo's body.
This is my goal, to walk and to back again my work and do it the same me doing before.
He still has a long road to go to get back to his baseline. The fact is he survived it, and it is a miracle that he survived it to this point.
And Castillo does not take that for granted.
It's my second chance.
Karen Lieberman, Global News, Toronto.
And that is Global National for this Tuesday. I'm Dawna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is Seacone's ice cream boat in Hulls Harbor, Nova Scotia. It's an authentic fishing vessel transformed into an ice cream parlor. It's closed right now because of the pandemic, but they hope to welcome ice cream lovers back next year. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you here again tomorrow. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.